Welcome to Spooky Art History with Jackie, Part 1. Today, we will be looking at some of history's creepiest paintings. But before we do, I'd like us to take a look at this quote. The principles of true art is not to portray, but to evoke. I think this is important to think about while we look at all of the images to come, because the artists wanted you to feel a certain way when looking at their images, regardless of subject matter. The first image we're going to look at is called The Picture of Dorian Gray by Ivan Allwright, painted in 1943. Ivan Allwright painted this lurid portrait for the Oscar-winning movie adaptation of Oscar Wilde's 1891 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. In Wilde's tale, Dorian Gray commissions a portrait of himself as an attractive young man and later trades his soul for an ever-youthful appearance. As the still handsome Gray leads an increasingly dissolute and evil life, his painted representation rots and decays, revealing the extent of his moral corruption. Allwright's renown as a painter of the macabre made him the ideal choice for Albert Lewin, the director of the movie, to paint the horrific image of Gray. Although the movie was shot in black and white, Lewin filmed the painted portrait in color to emphasize Gray's shocking transformation. The next image we're going to look at is called The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein the Younger in 1533. The Ambassadors is a painting by Hans Holbein the Younger, who was the court painter for King Henry VIII. It is a double portrait of two French ambassadors to England, as well as a still life of meticulously painted objects with double meanings. It has often been suggested that the two figures are symbolic. The figure on the left is in secular attire, while the figure on the right is dressed in clerical clothes. Scholars believe that this might be alluding to religious strife. Conflicts between secular and religious authorities are represented by the two men. The commonly accepted symbol of discord, a lute with broken strings, is included next to a hymn book. The most notable and famous of Holbein's symbols is the distorted skull placed in the bottom of the composition. The skull is a trompe-l'œil, which means it is an optical illusion. It can only be seen from the right-hand side of the painting. It is a visual puzzle the viewer must solve. It is intended as a vanitas, or memento mori, which means reminder of our mortality. It has been suggested that Holbein incorporated the skull and the crucifix in the upper left corner to encourage contemplation of one's impending death and resurrection. The next piece is The Skull of a Skeleton with Burning Cigarette by Vincent van Gogh, painted in 1885. The small oil-on-canvas painting featuring a skeleton and cigarette is part of the permanent collection of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. It was most likely painted in the winter of 1885 as a satirical comment on conservative academic practices. Before it was common to use live humans as models, the academic routine included the study of skeletons to develop an understanding of human anatomy. Van Gogh thought that these classes were boring and taught him nothing. This work is also a memento mori, as Van Gogh himself was in poor health at the time. The next piece is The Face of War by Salvador Dali, painted in 1940. The Face of War is a painting by Spanish surrealist painter Salvador Dali. The trauma and the view of war had served as inspiration for Dali's work. He sometimes believed his artistic vision to be premonitions of war. This work was painted between the end of the Spanish Civil War and the beginning of the Second World War. The painting depicts a disembodied face hovering against a barren desert landscape. The face is withered like that of a corpse and wears an expression of misery. In its mouth and eye sockets are identical faces. In their mouths and eyes are more identical faces in a process implied to be infinite. Swarming around the large face are biting serpents. In the lower right-hand corner is a handprint that Dali insisted was left by his own hand. This next piece is called Saturn Devouring His Son. It is the name given to a painting by Spanish artist Francisco Goya. And we will talk about this more in part 2 next week. Show us some of your spooky art history and tag us at the Art Station on Instagram. Thank you and see you next week.